if you learn something and you don't share it, what's the use, right? Somebody shared it with me, so I feel like it's my obligation to share it with them. My name is Betsy Irwin, and I am the former education director for Moundville Archaeological Park. I'm also the former director for the Moundville Native American Festival for 27 years. I started out at the Johana Archaeological Laboratory in 1983 as an archaeological assistant, and I took it over in 1991, took the festival over in 1991.
What made you want to start studying or educating people about Native culture?
Well, when I went to high school in the Philippines, and I took my first anthropology class there, and they did a dig simulation, and so what the professor did was he split the class in half. Each group had to invent a culture, make artifacts for that culture, bury those artifacts, and then the class swapped. And you dug up the other team's culture, and then you did the analysis, and then you did the presentation on it. And of course, most of the time when archaeologists excavate something, they're never going to be able to talk to the people of that culture, so they couldn't understand it. But what was fascinating was, when you started presenting, oh, this is this, and here's their language, and da-da-da-da-da, and the other team is going, no, it's not. So archaeology is really important, but to really tie it all together, you really need to talk to those people where those traditions came from. And there's always going to kind of be misunderstandings between different cultures and stuff, and that it was really at that point that I was like, oh, aha. And when I came here to school, I went to New College through the New College program and studied fine arts and anthropology. Of course, my parents, I'm sure they never thought I'd get a job in my field. First job I got was at the lab. 35 years later, I'm back here again as an artist. So I started it with the anthropology, and then the great thing about the University of Alabama and Moundville Archaeological Park was that if I was ever interested in anything that related to my job, I could go and do the research. I could go to Santa Fe and meet the artist and try and bring them back to Moundville, or I could go up to Cherokee or go out to Oklahoma, as long as it wasn't too much, But that freedom to allow me, because I've always just been really interested in learning. And hey, if you learn something and you don't share it, what's the use, right? Somebody shared it with me, so I feel like it's my obligation to share it with them.
So why was there a need to start a festival?
Well, there are a lot of people that back then and still now that don't realize that there are even Native Americans that were left in Alabama. The idea grew out of the Alabama Indian Resource Center, which was something that was funded by the state legislature, and we ended up being able to house it in Moundville Archaeological Park. And they actually provided some funding for different types of programming. And I had gone to Memphis and worked there as an education director, and there really weren't a lot of educational programs going on at the park at that point in time. And when I came back to Moundville, they were forming the Resource Center. We had an advisory board that was made up of some different people from the state recognized tribes, and it was sort of like, well, why aren't we doing a festival here? I mean, it's always been an educational event, and we always wanted to focus on the southeastern people, because at that point in time, the stereotyping was terrible. And so the first festival, which was not any bigger than this ellipse, that's where it was, and everyone could sell items, but they were also talking about a little part of their traditions and stuff. And as the festival started growing in numbers, we realized that we were going to have to separate out components. And Living History Camp was really one of those, the first components that got cut out. And then an area where music and performances. And the Living History Camp and the stage have kind of moved around the park until we finally got them settled up on the hill up there and the stage down there, and then it really stayed there. But once it started growing, we found it was easier to compartmentalize different sections of it, and that way if you had to move it or if you lost somebody that was over the head of it, you could just train that section again. And that's why the festival, even though we had a turnover, that's why the festival kind of came together. And a lot of those are volunteers or people that just come out for a couple of days a year, but they know what their job is at that area, so that even, we lost a lot of people with institutional knowledge. Well, we still had people that were running those areas that knew what to do. And that just worked out that way, and as we got tired of micromanaging areas, good people kind of stepped in and developing a paper trail for that too. Now, I've heard that my old computer is called the Betsy. It's probably on the Betsy. I'm like, oh no.
When you come here, when you get excited about coming here, what are you most interested or anticipating when you come here?
Well, for me, it's just seeing everybody. I love the living history encampment, and I love the artist row, just to see what the contemporary stuff, the new things that people are making. And that was one thing we tried to focus on, is presenting all aspects of Native culture, not just the prehistoric, not just the historic, but modern people too, even if they're traditional modern people or they're doing contemporary work, but to see what's different, what's changed up, and to kind of see how that same thread of tradition still runs through all of that and ties back to Moundville again.
I was going to Burritt, and so I worked with other educators, and I met Betsy, and it was a natural way to slide in and start coming to Moundville.
I bless Miss Betsy, who was the director here when I first came, and I met her at a powwow over in Louisiana. She went around and she liked my booth and what she saw, so she came over to me later and she said, Miss Loretta, have you ever been to Moundville? And I said, no ma'am, I don't believe I have. She said, well, you're coming now.
A lot of the people here, and especially the demonstrators, I know, talk about how you're the one who brought them to the festival. So what does that mean to you, that there are still people who still come to the Moundville Native American Festival?
It's just awesome. It's a homecoming is what it is. And 30 years ago, there were not a lot of Native people that were coming to the park, and this is their ancestral home. And so as the festival started growing and we started meeting these incredible artists and stuff, we're like, you need to come back to Moundville. And that was the basis really for how are you going to make people come back? Well, hospitality, Southern hospitality, and making people feel welcome here at their site. It's not ours, we're just taking care of it. That really helped the festival to grow.